Yeah, I see you.
Okay.
And we're live. What's up, everybody? So we're here with Zack, Korner. I think this might be your sixth or seventh appearance on this show, but every single time you've been here with Zack Foster debating him, you reached out to me around a week ago saying you'd like to chat with me. So I said, let's do it. I don't even know what the intention is, so I just called it Israelis Debate Gaza. I figure that's general enough.
Sure.
But yeah, Zack, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I have a lot prepared. I mean, I think I've been coming to the show since 2019. It's been about a yearly thing. So it's been quite a trip. I had that debate with Foster. It was pretty one-sided. He kicked my ass, which is why he's not here. And I'm going to be talking a lot of crap about him because I can't beat him when he's in front of me. So
I'm not.
my
I wouldn't even
opportunity.
frame it that way. I think you guys had a pretty decent back and forth. I agree with his position more, but I thought you held your own.
I could have done better. And I wanted to apologize to the audience because I realized I was losing and I raged in the middle and I started over talking. So hopefully that won't happen this time. And I have some stuff prepared. Can I give my intro though?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
All right, sure. So I just wanted to, I've had some followers here, but I want people to know who I am, a little bit of background about myself. So my name is Zack Korner. Like I said, I've been coming on the program. Just as a sidebar, I'm the founder of Mitzvah Judaism, which is a new stream of Judaism meant to compete with Reform, Conservative, and Modern Orthodoxy. It's a Judaism of heresy and tradition, Judaism of feeling. Eventually, there'll be a podcast associated with that. In terms of my life, so I was raised secular in America. I am American. I lived in Israel for 11 years. I was raised conservative, capital C. I moved to Israel after college, and my goal was to become an original Zionist thinker. I joined the army. I was part of this ragtag battalion called Kfir. I was an infantryman. I was mostly Sephardic, and let me tell you, they really put the infant in infantry. A lot of babies over there. I'm a veteran of the 2014 Gaza war. Didn't actually enter. I was half on vacation and half stationed in the Jordan Valley. Politically, I would say I was like a nuanced Kahanist. I became religious. Pretty easy in the army, no woman. Food's kosher. Everybody keeps Shabbos. So I was pretty much like, Rabbi Yehuda Cohen, something around there, a little less happy-go-lucky. And definitely less lucky because, like I said, there were no women there. But anyway, afterwards, I studied in yeshiva, rabbinic academy, thought about becoming a rabbi, decided to leave that community. I went to Tel Aviv in order to study Middle Eastern studies on my way to a PhD, never entered that program or completed it. But, it was at that time that my politics really took a pretty far turn to the left. I started hanging out with Palestinian Israeli students. It may be TMI, but I'm saying it for a reason. I had this long-running tryst with an Arab Israeli woman. She was Christian, not Muslim. I used to antagonize her in between rounds with talk about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. But I say that because, it's my motto that there's no coexistence without copulation, and Arab and Israeli Palestinian Israeli and Jewish Israeli students at Tel Aviv University almost never have sex with each other, which is significant and does not bode well for any solution to the conflict. I was removed from my reserve unit in the West Bank. I got into a fight with a settler who was trying to block the road. I told him that I'm in charge. He's not allowed to block the road. They were upset because there was some Supreme Court hearing that said that, the road had to be opened, and they disagreed with that. And we got into a shoving match, and I was ready to cock the gun, and the officer stepped in. And because I was really upset, I said in English, I can't wait until I come to your house with a bulldozer and bulldoze your house and kick your family out. And they were all recording this. So, I probably was viral on some modern Orthodox or settler WhatsApp groups. The last election I lived in Israel, that was 2022. I lived in Israel from about 2011 to 22, so 11 or 12 years. I voted for an Arab party. I voted for Mansour Abbas, who sat in government with Naftali Bennett. Just thought the guy was personally awesome. Always wanted to have a shawarma with him. Never had that opportunity, but he seemed like a really chill guy, and I thought that he genuinely believed in coexistence. I came to the conclusion that you cannot justify Israel by arguing that Jews have a right to a state. It's indefensible, and I would go so far to say that it's the worst idea in Jewish history. And I say all this. That idea, the idea that Jews deserve a state because, or rather, the idea that Zionism is based on a state for the Jews, that is the philosophical foundation of classical Hasbara that Adar always teases. But that's to say that classical Hasbara has no philosophical basis, because you cannot justify a Jewish state like that. So I say all this to argue, to set up my presentation, that the war in Gaza is a just war, the war in Iran is a just war, and that Zionism is fine. Fine is a term from chess. I like using chess terms, so get used to it. What fine means is when you hold a position that's neither winning nor losing. Zionism isn't winning because you can't justify from first principles that Jews deserve a state that violates the right of everybody to equality, but neither is Zionism losing because it's the best move on the chessboard. So we still have tricks, we still have moves, we still have hope, at least philosophically. I think the public debate is over, but there is hope for Zionism, and I hope to prove that. I been monologuing, mean to turn it over to you, Adar. In terms of content, I prepared a couple of things. One thing I have is 8 different ways. I think I have. Yeah, 8 different ways that the war in Gaza is not a genocide.
You want to read them?
I could start, but please interrupt me because I hate when I monologue.
Yeah, well, first I'll say I actually didn't know that background about you, so thanks for sharing that. You made 3 statements. One, the war in Iran is justified, Zionism is justified, and the war in Gaza is justified. So we're probably going to just need to pick one thing to focus on. We won't be able to get to all 3. So it sounds like Gaza.
I prepared 2 things. I think the first is going to be why it's not a genocide, and then the second, why it's a just war, and why I think we've misinterpreted why we're looking at the war in Gaza incorrectly.
Cool. Love to hear your case.
Okay, so when people say that like Gaza is a genocide, I think what they're basically saying is that it's the Holocaust. It's similar enough to the Nazi destruction of European Jewry in order for us to say that they're essentially the same. Now, I know that you've entertained that before, and you said, well, there's going to be differences between 2 political events, 2 historical events, even if they're fundamentally the same. And I agree with you on that. But what I hope to show is that there's enough differences between Israel's war in Gaza and between the Nazi Holocaust of European Jewry to exclude the idea that this is a genocide, and to argue instead that it's a total war.
Zach, can I cut you off real quick? Because I think you're starting with a false assumption. I think many Jews, when they hear the term genocide, our frame of reference for that is the Holocaust. So I understand why you're saying that, but genocide, the way it's defined and often used, is not saying it is the same as rounding up people and putting them in gas chambers. And it's also not the same as saying our intention to exterminate an entire population. So when people use the term genocide, that's generally not what they're referring to.
I don't think they're referring to a formal definition. I mean, I'm on Palestinian Twitter a lot. I'm in comments on YouTube.
I think they're saying a genocide. I agree. In broad terms, it's something very, very bad that is indefensible. They're looking for the harshest language to describe something horrific. So saying it's just a war doesn't cut it for most people. So They use the term genocide. There's no consensus as to how it's defined and what it means. There'll be perhaps a consensus, a legal consensus as to what it means, perhaps an academic consensus, but colloquially, it's used way more broadly.
I don't agree. I see in comments on Twitter, Israel is the Nazis. It's worse than the Nazis. Gaza is like Auschwitz. So I do think that that's the comp. I think that's the historical comparison. I think that certainly the Holocaust is the most famous.
I mean, Zach, that does exist on Twitter for sure, but you can't sum the entire pro-Palestine movement or the entire entirety of the group saying this is genocide as comparing it to Nazis. People do compare IDF to modern day Nazis. They're doing it because again, they're looking for the worst, the harshest thing they could say to describe what's going on.
Right, and that's the
yeah.
Holocaust, the ultimate crime. So I agree there's dissent, but if you're looking for a consensus definition, if you're looking for the most popular choice, that would be the Holocaust, right? They want to say that the genocide in Gaza is like the Holocaust, not only because the Holocaust is the most famous, but because the Holocaust involved Jews. And they want to say that Jews have not learned the lesson of the Holocaust, and that the Holocaust, that actually Jews have become Nazis, which changes the mythos of the Holocaust from murder to rape, right? We're like the demon spawn of Hitler, but I'm already getting off topic. So that's going to be my point of comparison. If at the end you want to say, okay, I agree with you, I disagree, but it's more like the Darfurian genocide or the Serbian genocide or the Rohingya genocide, that's perfectly fine. But I think that's the comp, and that's what I'm going to attack. So,
sounds good. But so we may not disagree on that point, right? Okay. Because I don't hold that this is the Holocaust. That's not my position.
No, I know.
But yeah, make your
enough
case.
People do. Yeah, enough people do, and
you have the platform to make the case. So
okay. So 8 different ways. We're going to go in alphabetical order. Citizens. Okay. So in Germany, once the Holocaust began in 1939, there were basically no more German Jewish civilians. They had been, their rights had been stripped. Many of them had been rounded up, placed in camps, certainly by 1941. But there were no German Jewish citizens at that point. They weren't able to take their family on vacation. They weren't able to get on a plane and go to Amsterdam. They weren't able to study. They weren't able to post things on social media. Well, I guess nobody was, but they weren't able to exercise the full set of rights. There were no citizens in Germany. All the Jewish citizens had been stripped of their rights, or they had been rounded up and shipped off somewhere else. Palestinian Israelis enjoy a full set of rights. Are they equal? They're not equal. Are they second-class citizens? I'm not so happy with that, but I think it's important to note that they haven't been placed in any sort of camps like the Americans did with the Japanese during World War II. They've still been given the freedom of movement. They still go to work. They still post on Instagram. They go on vacation, and they're able to live freely. Maybe not express themselves freely, but they are able to live freely. And that's a major distinction. If Israel was truly committing genocide, you would see attacks on the Israeli-Palestinian population. You would, not necessarily, but I think that's one aspect that you would certainly expect to see. So reason number 1, in Germany, the citizens, they were stripped of their rights. They were sent off. In Israel, Palestinian citizens still have the same rights that they've always had. The freedom of expression has been tamped down on, but they're able to do whatever else they want to do.
Okay.
Reason.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
but Zach, I'm not sure. Like, this isn't a position I hold. You know, I think what I'd be interested in having a conversation with you is the war in Gaza is just. Let's dive deeper into that. We could find endless differences.
But I'll go. If you want to do that, I'll do that. I mean, if you want me to run through the list, I'll run through the list. But
yeah. So how long do you think you need to run through the list?
It depends how much you want. If I can just go one after the other if you're not really interested in this. I'll start going and
you prepared it, so I think it's content that people will watch, and there are people who do think it's a 1-for-1 comparison. So I'm not saying there's no value in this, but I don't want this to take up most of our time here. So I would say,
so you know what? We'll go from 8 to about 3 or 4. Okay,
cool.
We'll go from 8 to about 3 or 4. Next one. So I'm skipping civilian combatant ratio. That one I'm basically skipping. It's within the historical norm. Death camps. Can you name me a death camp in Gaza? There are no death camps. The method of killing, these are the ones I'm running through, Adar. The method of killing, there's really been no genocide in history by bombing. I mean, we dropped nukes on Japan. That wasn't a genocide. There has to be some sort of round them up and kill them, round them up and shoot them, round them up and gas them, or starving them to death. Israel hasn't done any of those things. Military threat. Okay, so this is a major one. So the Jews in Europe posed no military threat to the Germans. I mean, they imagined a threat, but there was no threat. There weren't Jews in Poland and Romania marching with signs about how the Germans were settlers and they didn't deserve a state and they had to go back to France or Britain or America or Canada, wherever they claim they came from. Jews from Poland and Romania and Hungary weren't breaking into Germany and taking German hostages and shooting rockets. There was no military threat. The threat to Germans was entirely imagined. Now, I've read experts, so-called experts, who say that, well, a military threat can be present in the case of a genocide, right? You can have a genocide when there's also a legitimate military threat. Fine. But you could also have a legitimate military threat where there is no genocide, and there is no genocide here. I'll keep going. And this is where I think you're going to, this is where I think I'm going to rile you up. The percentage killed, okay? So let's take a look at like World War II, right? Just war, killed a lot of people. How many people died in Germany? I mean, we carpet bombed their cities. We killed, between civilians and combatants, between 8 to 10% of their population. At the end of the war, 2 million German women were raped. Up to 2 million German women were raped by Russia, who is our ally. You know, we bombed their cities. We killed tens of thousands of children. We killed tens of thousands of women. And you say, well, that happened a really long time ago. Yes, but we haven't changed our verdict on that. I mean, it's still, we still believe that the Allies were right and the Axis were wrong. We've re-examined it. You know, we've maybe said that dropping a bomb on Japan, or dropping nuclear bombs on Japan, and firebombing Tokyo, which also killed hundreds of thousands of civilians, we may say that that was terrorism and that was wrong. But again, it doesn't change our overall verdict of the war. So just to keep running through the percentages, and then I'll let you in. 5 to 6%. We nuked of Japan. Sorry, I'm talking a little fast. Let me slow down. Japan, 5 to 6% were killed. We nuked medium-sized cities. Nobody called that a genocide. Again, Germany, we killed 10% of the population. Not a genocide. If you look at Poland and Russia, which were the victims of German genocide, Germans were not only intent on killing Jews, they were also intent on killing Slavs, which they believed to be genetically inferior. The percentage of people that died in Poland was about 20% of the population. That's genocide. The percentage of people who died in Russia, again, 20%. That's genocide. If you look at the percentage of Jews under German control, under Nazi German control, who perished during World War II, then you get up to an incredible 66%. 2/3 of all Jews, of all European Jewry died. I'm not sure if that's under Nazi Germany control or all of Germany. 66%, including 93% of all Jews in Poland. That's a genocide. 20% in Poland, genocide. 20% in Russia, genocide. 93% of Jews in Poland, that's a genocide. Now, when we turn to Palestine, the first thing we have to establish is how many people have been killed in Palestine, in Gaza. So for this, I turn to Hamas. Hamas has been right in all the other wars, plus or minus statistical variance. I have no reason not to trust what they say. I think that basically the way that they tally the dead is scientific. People come in, they say, my son was killed, my father was killed, and they mark it down off their population registry. You know, Palestinians, the way they live in real communities. It's not like here in the suburbs where, you know, you hate your neighbor and, you know, you don't even know what their name is and you're pretty sure she's sleeping with the mailman and, you know, you never want to talk to her. These are communities that are intertwined. People know each other. So when they say that 70,000 people have died, 70,000 people have died. So what percentage is that of the total number of Palestinians in the area that Israel controls? So Israel controls Gaza, it controls the West Bank, and it controls, obviously, the Palestinian towns. You sum all of them up, that's 7 million people. So Israel has killed 1% of Palestinians. If you want to focus on Gaza, how many people are in Gaza? That's a bit of a question. Let's settle on the number 2.1 million. You could say 1.9 million. You could say 2.3 million. I like 2.1 million because 21 and 7 make 3. 3% have been killed. Okay, so that is consistent with the number killed in other total wars. You're right, it's not a regular war, it's a total war, but it's a total war and it's not a genocide.
Thank you. Cool, let's run through it. I'm not going to try to make the case that this was like the Holocaust, because that's not a position I hold. I think trying to compare this to World War II to draw a moral parallel is just meaningless. We have had nearly 100 years of progress as a species. After World War II, we passed international law because we recognized something very important. We understood that during war, warring parties have no reason to care for the civilians of the nation they are at war with. And as their weapons become more powerful, this becomes increasingly destructive towards civilians. So we passed international law in order to make progress as a species. So trying to look at the time when we still had segregation in America and slavery was still legal in some Western countries, I just don't think there's any reason to make that comparison. When we do look at were the Allies just in destroying the Nazis, I think few people would argue that it was unjust. But the means in which they did that, yes, the Allies committed many war crimes, crimes against humanity. And I think today, had the Allies done something like they did then, some of those acts would be considered acts of genocide. Now, have you read the definition of genocide?
I have, and it's one of these international definitions, which I think is very murky, and it can be argued for both sides.
Okay,
you're welcome
sure.
to read it, and we can discuss it.
Well, so yeah,
I'll just say with your comment on international law, I don't think what you say is historically accurate. I think you're reading things backwards through the lens of the present to the past. I think international law was passed not to render a judgment against the Allied war effort against the Axis, but to render a judgment against the Axis's their acts of imperialism and genocide and existential destruction of the community.
Well. It was to try to create a new world order where we're not going to see that level of death and destruction. It's about us making progress, and we've had nearly 100 years to continue to build on that progress. So
I'm not convinced we've made that much progress. I'm convinced we've made progress within our societies. I mean, you mentioned slavery, you mentioned Jim Crow. Yes, now we know that slavery is wrong, Jim Crow is wrong, but we haven't changed that verdict on the Allies. We still believe.
When it's for sure, it's not a conversation we have in the West. Let's assess World War II and see what we did wrong. Generally, that's not how history works. There's generally a lack of self-reflection, but that's not the metric. That's not how one should look at it. You're saying we haven't made progress in terms of international law. I mean, we've clearly defined international law tremendously since World War II. You could say in practice we haven't made progress, but so that's the problem. What's happening in Gaza is proof that we're not making the progress that we need to make. And if we can't create a world where we don't value humans' inalienable right to life, and we think it's okay to just mass murder civilians for some potential outcome that we might maybe one day achieve, it increases humanity's risk of existential threat. And I'm not just saying this to be a fearmonger, but as our weapons get more powerful, we're on the verge of AI weaponry. The idea that you can just level a city with the civilian population stuck inside and say that's a world that's more dangerous, not just for Palestinians, but for us Jews. And I'll get more into that.
Yeah, so, but you basically reached the conclusion that I was trying to get you to reach, which is that the war that the Allies fought against the Axis was a brutal war, but ultimately it was a just war where atrocities were committed. And that's Israel's war in Gaza. It is a just war. It is not a genocide where atrocities are committed. We can talk about those atrocities, which is fine, but that's what it is.
So again, it's just in the sense that Israel has a right to self-defense, the same way it's true that Palestinians have a right to resist. That doesn't mean October 7th was a legitimate form of resistance, the same way what our response is not a legitimate form of self-defense. But I want to.
But you also said that Israel, and I've heard this a lot, that the West can no longer stand for the international order if it stands behind Israel, because Israel is destroying the international order of human rights.
Correct.
What about Hamas? Like, what in October 7th upheld the foundation of human rights? Because it seemed like everything that Hamas, which is the democratically elected and popularly backed government of the Palestinians, everything the Palestinians did on October 7th, everything their freedom fighters did, was a violation of human rights. So you say like Israel violates human rights, and the inflection that I hear in your voice is that Palestinians don't violate human rights.
But Zach,
but they do violate human rights.
Zach, that's a complete straw man. I literally said October 7th is not a legitimate form of resistance. I'm making that very, very clear. I would say, though, with power comes responsibility. And when a powerful entity breaks international law, the impact is far greater. So Hamas, on their most successful day in history, killed 1,200 Israelis. It's horrific. I'm not trying to downplay it. It's horrific. Yeah. That's their most successful day in history.
Right.
We then in the past 2 years killed nearly 100,000 civilians.
Good. I'm glad you said that, because you fell into the exact trap, and I heard you say it before. It's incorrect. You're comparing tomatoes and potatoes.
Hold on. Wait. No,
you are. You're comparing two completely different things. You're not comparing like with like. So I'll just go.
I'm simply explaining why international law matters for all parties, but the more powerful party breaking international law is going to have far greater consequences for very obvious reasons. And I would go on to say, if China and America have a war and they're breaking international law, that would be far worse than Israel breaking international law because of the potential harm they could cause by breaking international law. So I'm not saying weaker entities should get a free pass, but our level of concern should increase as the entity becomes more powerful because of its potential to destroy life. Okay. Now, I do want to get to some more points, because you made a lot of points and you keep cutting me off. I'll give you all the time you need, but so you kept talking about percentages. But if you read the definition of genocide, percentages are not relevant to determine if it's a genocide or not. It could be, you could kill 1% of the population. You could kill 0.5% of the population. If you're doing it intentionally, that would still constitute genocide. So
if you're doing it intentionally in order to destroy the group, then killing part of the group. I understand why they say part of the group, because if you were a Nazi, you would argue that, let's say the Nazis, it wasn't really a genocide because they only killed the Jews of Europe, right? This is what.
No, I mean, again, Nazis are not arguing. Again, the people who are currently trying to defend against one of the worst atrocities of the 21st century are not Nazis. It's Israelis. Okay.
Yeah, including me. I think we should open up the floor to all of history. I don't know why we have to restrict ourselves to the 21st century, but the intent has to be there, Adar.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you why. Because if I tell you I want to kidnap your sister and enslave her because we did that throughout history, you'd be like, no, man, that's unacceptable, and you'd have a pretty legitimate reason to say that.
No, but my point of bringing history is to say there are wars that we fought before the 21st century where our judgment hasn't changed on them. So if I can introduce as admissible evidence, I'd like to bring in both the Civil War and World War II. I just want to say, with the whole thing where you said part of the group, I agree. It can be genocide if Israel intends to destroy the entire Gazan population. But it's clear from the course of the war that
no.
I mean, we could. Yes. If Israel intends,
Zach, how about this? Let me just speak, because I gave you like 7 to 10 minutes. Let me just speak, and then you can respond. So the percentage doesn't matter, and I also am not even interested in a debate on terminology. Generally, when I'm describing what's happening in Gaza, I don't say genocide for two main reasons. The debate on terminology is not interesting to me, and B, I know how triggering it is to Jews and how they get turned off when they hear that, and I do want to reach Jews with how I describe what I'm saying. So I say one of the greatest atrocities in the 21st century. There's a level of subjectivity there. You could agree, you could not agree, but it's not. We're not going to get into debate on terminology. We're going to get into debate on facts on the ground, and I'm much more interested in that. So I'd rather have that be the focus. Now, let's just talk about what happened in Gaza. First, I just want to paint a picture of the state of Israeli society, right? Our October 7th took an already radical population and pushed us over to the edge, to the point where we became genocidal. Now, this is represented in quotes from our leaders, from news anchors, from IDF soldiers, and it's represented in polls. I could read you some quotes if you want to hear them. We do have the infamous Netanyahu comparing Gazans to Amalek. I know you said he was talking about a different verse. I think that's completely irrelevant. It's like when people say globalize the Intifada, if a Jew says that's not cool, they're like, no, we're talking about the first Intifada, which wasn't violent. Again, that's not a legitimate pushback. He compared Gazans to Amalek. In addition to that, we have Nissim Vaturi, member of Knesset, saying, wipe Gaza off the face of the earth. Gaza must be burned. There are no innocents there. We need to eliminate them. Amichai Eliyahu said, no non-combatants in Gaza, and that using an atomic bomb on Gaza, one of the possibilities. Smotrich said, who's part of the war cabinet, in Gaza there are 2 million Nazis. Now, this is not just leadership. This is represented in the population. A recent poll came out showing 60% of Jewish Israelis believe there are no innocents in Gaza. What do you think happens when you send a military in where a significant portion of that military believe that there are no innocents, when the leadership also, many of whom don't think there are innocents? That's one. Two, the only way you could send in a force like that without having an abundance of war crimes is if you have a very strong internal regulation, meaning a system of accountability when war crimes are committed. Israel does not have that. The reason we don't have that is
we talk about the first point, Adar, because you're going on to a second point.
Yeah, sure.
Because I have something that you haven't heard.
Yeah.
I don't actually give a shit about the quotes. The quotes don't matter, and they don't matter because
it shows genocidal intent. It shows genocidal intent, so it does matter.
Is there genocidal intent? Yes. Is Israeli a society genocidal? Yes, absolutely. And Palestinians should not only be outraged but scared shitless about that. In terms of what Smotrich has said and these other minor figures, let me tell you, Benjamin Netanyahu, he wears the pants, okay? Smotrich, he wears the panties. And I say I don't give a shit about what they say because actions speak louder than words. We have about 21, 22 months of data from the war. So,
I'm going to get into the actions.
But we should judge based on what Israel has done in the war and not what people have said before the war, because it's much more important to judge Israel by its actions than by what its ministers had said. And let me tell you, Benjamin Netanyahu, on a strategic level, Benjamin Netanyahu makes all of the decisions. He allows Smotrich to run his mouth in order to keep Smotrich in the coalition. Smotrich effectively has no power, and we see that from the record.
Actually, I don't think that's true because Smotrich is needed to keep his coalition intact. So he certainly does have influence. And we see this when we get communications from the war room and arguments. He definitely has influence. But I would agree with you that quotes don't matter as much as actions. I'm painting a picture because the quotes very much support the actions. And we're going to...
Just before you say that, just one very quick question.
Yeah.
What is your argument here? Is your argument genocide or is your argument war crimes? Because at first you said genocide, you started reading the definition, and now you seem to be saying war crimes, because those are two different things.
No, so again, I'm arguing that the way we're fighting this war is unjust. It amounts to one of the worst atrocities of the 21st century, and it fits neatly in the definition of genocide. Now, I don't care about debate on terminology, so I call it an atrocity. But yeah, I have no problem defending the case that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. Now, what I will say is that this isn't going to look like other genocides. I think this is the first genocide in history that was attempted while maintaining plausible deniability. That's what Israel's doing. So if you want to understand this genocide relative to other genocides, it's what does a genocide look like when the warring party tries to maintain plausible deniability on their genocide. And when we look at it through that lens, it all makes perfect sense. Okay, so let's talk about actions. But I do want to talk about the lack of internal regulation because it's important. Because when you have such a radical population unleashed in Gaza, and you don't have internal regulation, you're going to see an abundance of war crimes. The IDF is the most revered institution in Israel. When you hold a soldier accountable, there's social and political consequences. We saw this very clearly with this Day Teiman gang rape incident, where prison guards were arrested for alleged gang rape. We had far-right Israelis raid the courthouse and the prison in order to free them, including a member of Knesset. This demonstrates very clearly that there's a cost to holding soldiers accountable. There's very little internal regulation. We see this demonstrated very clearly in front of our eyes with IDF soldiers uploading to social media, them committing relatively minor war crimes, but stealing from homes, dehumanizing and abusing prisoners, many of whom we then discover are innocent. The stuff they did with the lingerie, which I don't know if it's a war crime, but it's certainly distasteful and speaks to the mentality. Destroying medical infrastructure, blowing up water infrastructure. All this was uploaded with joy. It speaks about the discipline and the lack of accountability and the fact that there won't be repercussions in Israeli society. Now, let's look at actions that on a systemic level, how Israel's conducted themselves. There's been a very clear systematic destruction of civilian infrastructure, making Gaza unlivable. Water infrastructure has been decimated. Wells, desalination plants, and water treatment facilities. Cropland, the majority of cropland has been destroyed. Power plants have been destroyed. Only 12 out of the 36 hospitals in Gaza are currently operational, and even those are partially operational. We said we're going to starve Gazans, and for months at a time, we have not let aid in. That too amounts to a war crime. There's reports of us using Gazans as human shields. There's one report of a 70-something-year-old man that for hours, the IDF was sending him into multiple buildings to see if it's not booby-trapped. After they released him after hours, he was shot by another unit. This is a significant report because it shows two war crimes by two separate units operating side by side. We have destroying the IDF systematically destroying homes after they stay in them. So the IDF will stay in a home and then they'll burn the home down or destroy it with a bulldozer. Their justification is, in case we leave something in the home, we don't want Hamas to find it, so we're going to destroy the home. We have large areas of Gaza that are no-go zones, but we know that they have not been adequately evacuated. The policy by many units in those no-go zones is shoot everyone on site. Some say shoot every man on site. Others will say shoot anyone on site. And then we have whistleblowers telling us that it was permissible to kill 20 civilians in order to kill one low-ranking operative in an airstrike and kill 100+ civilians for a high-ranking operative in an airstrike. These are levels of proportionality unlike which we've ever seen. Now, that's the damage done. Now, what's the incentive? Why would Israel want to do this? Well, I think there's some clear incentives. First of all, Netanyahu has recently made it clear that he would like to relocate Gazans. He supports the Trump peace plan. The single best way to get Gazans to leave is to get them to voluntarily leave. The way to get people to voluntarily leave is to destroy their way of life and to put them at grave risk so they'll leave. Another incentive is to punish the population so severely that they would never want to do something like this again, or that Hamas would think twice before doing something like this again. And the third is harm the civilian population so much that Hamas surrenders. And we did get some insight that this is a strategy because in a recent war cabinet meeting, they said one of our options is to continue the siege until Hamas surrenders. But we know that the siege is disproportionately and overwhelmingly going to harm civilians because there's no way you could starve 30,000 militants without starving 2 million people. Hamas has better access to food than the civilian population. So there's very clear incentive to harming civilians. There's intent, there's an incentive, and then there's an action. Now, I would say if you want to cause this much death and destruction, and the numbers are 4 to 5% of the civilian population have been killed, a higher rate of children have been killed out of any conflict since the Rwanda genocide. And the way I calculate rate is children killed per 100,000 per year, highest rate since the Rwanda genocide. And almost certainly the highest civilian to combatant ratio in the 21st century as well. That we don't know for sure because we don't have the numbers on combatants, but almost certainly that too will be the highest. So numbers, this is not the standard of other wars. It's far worse. And what have we accomplished? Hamas is still in power. The only hostages we've gone back, aside from 7, have been through negotiation, not through force. And over 500 dead of our own. We're isolated internationally more than ever before. We took a blow to our economy. The next generation, very likely, is in the West is not going to be pro-Israel. There's such a clear cost, not just to the civilian life in Gaza, to us, to our own people, to our reputation, to the safety of Jews around the world, only for Hamas to still be in power and still controlling 30% of Gaza 2 years later. How in any way, shape, or form can this be seen as a well-fought war or a justified war? It very clearly amounts to one of the greatest atrocities of the century. And I say this with shame. I'm embarrassed for what my country's done. I'm embarrassed for what my people are supporting. And we are going to need to pay the consequences for this for generations. I'll give it over to you.
Look, I think a lot of what you said is true. And if you go by action to action, it's difficult to justify it. But let me say, this has come at the end of about 100-year process of oppression and violence, where Israel has tried just about everything in order to stop the threats against its population, and finally broke.
I agree.
The Israeli society broke. Israel is a paranoid, mentally unwell, tribal, obviously deeply racist country. And in many ways, the attack on October 7th turned us into the monsters that you always said we were, because, we're going to do whatever we can in order to survive. And there's really nothing else that I just don't see what else we could have done, Adar. I'm really sorry. Look, when you examine the 22-month or 21-month, whatever it is, course of the war, I think it's very clear what Israel's goals were. And the goal is domicide, right? The destruction of buildings, the destruction of civilian infrastructure. I think this actually could have been predicted. I didn't make this prediction, but Israel has this policy in the West Bank of, after like a West Bank terrorist or freedom fighter, whatever you want to call them, kills an Israeli soldier, an Israeli civilian, what they do is, instead of like killing the perpetrator, they kill their house, right? They kill their family's house. Instead of expelling the family or killing the family, or what more right-wing, they destroy the house instead of killing the family. And this has been roundly criticized, both within Israel, mainly without Israel. But, we can understand the war of Gaza in much the same light, right? It's a domicide, a destruction of buildings, but it isn't a destruction of all life in Gaza. I don't see how you could argue that. The number of 4 to 5% is too high. I don't agree with that. Now, in terms of the number of civilian deaths, I don't fully place the blame with Israel for that. Because if you look at the war that we fought in Lebanon, the same vicious, monstrous, genocidal, racist Israelis fought a Lebanese population of Arab and Muslims that we do not like. If you look at the ratio of civilian to combatant deaths there, it's about as perfect a war as could have been fought. It's something like 19-1 combatants to civilians, 20-1. And that's because the civilians in Lebanon were able to escape. They were able to escape through Syria. They were able to escape into northern Lebanon. And Israel didn't go after them because their target was mainly Hezbollah, just like Israel's main target in this war is Hamas. The goal is to create peace. And many Israelis, unfortunately, have reached the conclusion that if peace cannot come through a containment policy, then it cannot come through any way but a war of total submission. And that's the purpose of this war, is to completely submit the Palestinians. It's in many ways the war that we promised, but I'm deviating from my first point. What I don't like about the analysis from the international community is the lack of practicality. This idea that the international community is somehow, some way not responsible for the civilians in Gaza. Because if the international community, after seeing Israel's bombing campaign in the first few weeks, if they had said, wow, Israel is going absolutely ballistic, Israel is going crazy, Israel has broken, these people are absolutely batshit insane. If there had been an international effort to get civilians out of Gaza, we would have seen a tremendous savings of human life. I think Israel still goes and destroys all the buildings, but we would have seen a saving of human life. And I put the responsibility, not fully, but partially within the international community. If the international community had, let's say, pressured Egypt through diplomatic sanctions or maybe diplomatic incentives, let's say water infrastructure, which Egypt needs, billions of dollars just in food aid. Egypt is a desperately poor population. I think that many of the civilians should have been saved. There's this thing in law called the last clear chance doctrine. So it's the idea that if you have the last clear chance to avoid an accident, even if you're at fault, even if you're not at fault, then it's on you to avoid the accident. So for instance, if I'm driving and in the middle of the road, there's a pedestrian walking, and they shouldn't be walking in the middle of the road, and let's say they're drunk, and let's say they're wobbling and they're on their phone and they're doing 1,000,001 things. If I have time to slow down my car or swerve and avoid an accident without hurting myself, if I still drive past that civilian, then I'm at fault. And so, we're looking for a solution to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. We're not going to find that. But in terms of a solution to the loss of Palestinian life, the international community could have done more, and they should have done more. And that is your obligation, according to the last clear chance doctrine. Number two, you made the point that Hamas has won the war. And I think you're right. If you take away Iran and if you take away Lebanon, I think with those victories in place, I think Israel can say that militarily and strategically it won. But in terms of the long term and public diplomacy, the Palestinians won this war. I mean, the Democrats in 2017, young Democrats, were plus 14% pro-Israel. And now they're plus 56% pro-Palestinian. So that is a swing of about 70% in 8 years. And in many ways, this is kind of the disaster that we warned you guys about, because you incentivize this behavior. You incentivize this strategy of human sacrifice that Hamas undertakes. And again, you can hold the two and say, you could say, as I just said, that Israel is monstrous and Israel is racist. I said it, and there's no but. There's no but. I lived in Israel. Monstrous, racist, fine. At the same time, you are incentivizing. You did incentivize this war. And, they designed their strategy around this. I mean, look, the model for the Palestinian national movement, it's not apartheid South Africa. It's not apartheid America. It's Algeria. And Algeria fought a brutal, brutal, brutal war against the French settler colony. There was a French settler colony there that had been around for about 100 years. And the Algerians rose up in a brutal, crazy civil war that wound up killing, I think, 1.5 million Algerians. And they won. They won their own country. They won their own independence. And since the 1950s, the Palestinians have looked towards the Algerians as an example of how their national movement should be constructed, right? They have the same goal, which is not peace with Israel or peace with the Jews, but rather the destruction of Jewish life in Palestine, the return of the settler colonists back to Europe, where they came from, and at the cost of millions and millions, not millions, but hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, this was the infamous chant of Yasser Arafat right before the first Intifada, a million martyrs march on Jerusalem. Where is that million martyrs figure from? It's from Algeria. Palestinians talk about Sumud. Forgive me for the poor pronunciation. They talk about sacrifice. And that's how they see the 70,000 dead in Gaza. They don't see them as victims. They see them as martyrs. And, they're watching this channel and they're looking at Twitter and they're looking, at these polls and they're saying this strategy is working. And it'll just be another 5 years from now or 10 years from now until finally we burst through the gates, we destroy the Israeli government, we annihilate the Israeli society, and we regain Palestine for ourselves. In terms of the justice of the war, if you want me to go there, and you could cut me off.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Keep going.
I don't have.
1 second. We have a beautiful, perfect kitty here. Please, sweetie, are you a commentator on the Israel-Palestinian conflict? She says no. I'm just a kitty. Anyway,
She doesn't even know that there's such a thing as Israel or Palestine.
That's why we love her. Well, we need to give our brain a break. In terms of the justice of the war, and I want to go back to a point that you made where you said that Hamas only killed 1,200 Israelis, but Israel has killed, You didn't dispute the 70,000 figure, so I'm going to keep using it. I know you had an expert on.
I think the civilian death toll is between 70 to 100,000. Civilian. I'm not talking about combatants, and we could get into the weeds of that.
Let's not, because I don't think it changes anything. I'll be honest. Like guys like Eisenberg, who I respect, they'll say
you should not respect Eisenberg. It's either he's extremely low IQ or he's a pathological liar. He has not put out a single serious analysis on the conflict. I've debunked everything he's written. Well, not everything, almost everything he's written. The things I haven't debunked is just because it's not worth my time. He's not a serious analyst. So maybe at some point maybe not on this stream, but I'm happy to tell you why. Do not trust anything he says. He's not a serious analyst.
But let me just say about Hamas.
He doesn't have the same courage you have coming here to have this debate. He blocked me when I called him out on his shit, just to show the difference.
I just tell the truth. I just calls him as I sees him, sir. I just tell it as I see it. But I appreciate the compliment. Anyway, you said Hamas only killed 1,200 and Israel killed, I'm just going to say 70,000. You're comparing tomatoes and potatoes. Hamas killed 1,200 because that's the number they were able to kill. Just locally, there's a wonderful series of reports coming out from Times of Israel. I think Eitan Fishberg, where he really gets into the weeds about the battles of fought in the kibbutzim, in the neighboring Israeli towns and villages around on October 7th. And there were many cases where soldiers and local protection forces turned Hamas back. And if they weren't there, Hamas would have killed many more people. So Hamas killed 1,200 because it was only able to kill 1,200 people. Right? If Hamas, now let's say Allah took away all of Israel's weapons. Let's say he cast a spell and, all of the weapons were taken away. Israeli soldiers woke up. There were no guns, there were no bullets, there were no tanks, there were no planes. And Hamas had not Hamas, Palestinians had total free reign. They could do whatever they want within Israel. There was nobody holding them back. And I'm going to pose the question to you. How many Israeli Jews do you think they would have killed on October 7th and the days after that if they met no resistance whatsoever?
Sure. So first, I just want to make something clear. The reason I compared the number is to demonstrate that unchecked power is more dangerous. Like the more powerful an entity is, the more dangerous they are when they act irresponsibly. Now you're doing something more of a moral comparison, but I think it's very hard to compare morality with two entities that have such different levels of power. The hypothetical is inherently problematic because the second a group is powerful enough to kill an entire population, they no longer try to maximize harm. This is pretty consistent. So Hamas was more successful than they thought they would be, so they took it all the way. They didn't think they would make it to the kibbutzim and it would take hours for them to all, they didn't think it would be that successful. They didn't have to create some restriction mechanism not to overdo it. They don't have the power to overdo it. Had they had all the power, they would be viewing this differently. Had we not had the power, we would have had even less consideration for civilian life. So the hypothetical doesn't work just because the level of power one has is extremely deterministic to the strategies they're going to use and the level of force they're going to use. When you're infinitely weaker, you use 100% force. When you're infinitely stronger, okay, so you can.
So it's just about power. There are ideas that Jews. Because the problem I have with
not just about power. I'm explaining why.
No, you didn't answer my question.
So let me answer. But
I want a number.
I'm explaining why there's a problem with the hypothetical. Had we had no army, how many would they have killed? Maybe 10x. They had a limited amount of people.
And why would they have stopped?
They would have ran out. They would have ran out of ammo.
So let's say they had infinite ammo and better,
but again,
they had magic bullets.
Again,
how many would they have killed? Come on, say
it. You're saying if they had the ability, if tomorrow the IDF just disappears, all the guns disappear from Israel,
and only the soldiers are there, no guns, no weapons, no ability to defend ourselves. how many would they kill?
I imagine that could be hundreds of thousands. It could be 1 million plus.
Okay, and there we
yeah.
go. And but okay, so when you say that Hamas,
But this doesn't
killed,
prove this, again. This does not prove anything. It's just not because it's an unrealistic hypothetical. Again, when somebody
it proves that you have great arms because you answered when, but it does prove it does prove something, and I'm getting
what
to
does
that.
it prove?
It proves that you're comparing the wrong things. And if we were to use your same logic, if we were to apply your
Zach,
same logic,
but I'm not. No. But this again, this is not my argument. I'm not making.
So make your argument.
Well, no, but again, I made my argument. Now you're responding to something completely different.
I'm not responding to something completely different.
I'm not making
a point.
I'm not making a moral comparison though. So to say I'm comparing tomatoes and potatoes, I brought up the number that they killed simply to demonstrate a point that all people should be held to international law. But the more powerful a party is, the greater our concern should be if they're not holding themselves to international law. So I don't see how this hypothetical is relevant, but you can continue to make
it's a fine point on international law. We can get into it. The point, let me just make the full point before I go off about World War II again. And by the way, to whoever called me a Hosperist, I'm a neo-Hosperist. So just get your terminology right. In any event, so you're comparing 1,200 that Hamas killed to the 70,000 that Israel killed. You're comparing the number that Hamas could kill to the number that Israel chose to kill. So that's where you're comparing tomatoes to potatoes. That's where you're comparing unlike to like. Right? You have to compare the number that they choose to the number that they choose. So you said it yourself. They would basically kill everybody. Hamas, if they had the power, they would come in, they would cut. You said hundreds of thousands. Let's take that. They would kill hundreds. And now I'm saying it, and I'll let you respond. I mean, it's your show. I shouldn't say I'll let you respond. You respond. But look, my point is, if you were to apply the same standards that you're using to judge this war to World War II, you would come to the exact wrong conclusion, because the Allies killed tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, German children and German women. The Germans, on the other hand, killed no American children and no American women. I don't think that they attacked America at all. I mean, maybe there were some Americans in British air bases, but in terms of American soil, they didn't kill anybody. So how can it be that the Allies are right and the Axis is wrong? Because using your standard for the Israel-Gaza war, we get the exact wrong conclusion. We'd be forced to conclude, that the Axis is right,
Zach,
and the Allies are wrong. And we could do the same thing, by the way, that you just did. We could go through and we could list all of the things that the Allies did, how they destroyed water and plants. We could take out a beautiful German girl, blonde as can be, put her on TikTok if such a thing existed, and say, look at this beautiful girl. Look how much the Allies hate life. We could send like a Max Blumenthal or an Aaron Mate down to the DP camps that were in America and say, look at what America's doing to the Japanese. It's just as bad as what the Allies, as what the Axis is doing to the Jews. There's no difference between the two. And how can we solve this problem? Because if the Axis had power, let's say the Axis won the war, let's say they had nuclear weapons, they would have nuked New York, they would have nuked Los Angeles, they would have invaded America, they would have set up death camps in Alabama and Indiana and sent all the American Jews there. So the fact that the Allies killed hundreds of thousands of German women and hundreds of thousands of German children, and the Axis killed 0 American children and 0 American women, leads us to the wrong comparison. Now, you also talk about power. You say that things are different because of power. They're not. The Allies had nuclear weapons. The Axis didn't have nuclear weapons. In fact, not only did the Allies have nuclear weapons, they used the nuclear weapons on Japan, killing hundreds of thousands of women or tens of thousands of women.
Zach, Zach, this entire tangent is a straw man. This literally has nothing to do with what I said.
Because we have the answer in the back of the textbook. You know, I was a math student in college, and for the odd problems, they give you the answer. So you look in the back, and the answer is x equals 3. If you have y equals 5, it means that something went wrong. So we have the answer. The Allies were right. Okay, we have the answer. The North was right in the Civil War. The North starved thousands of Southern children to death, and still they were right. So you're using this, they kill women and they kill children as this trump card to say that Israel is unjust in this war. And I'm saying that that just isn't true when we look at other wars. It just isn't right. It seems like it's right, but it's wrong.
So again, I started by saying this, and I feel like it's a waste of my time and energy to need to repeat it. The comparison to World War II is bad for many reasons. One, we've made a lot of progress since World War II, and we passed international law because we learned a lot from World War II. Okay, that's one. Two, to say that because the Allies were good and the Nazis were bad, therefore whatever Israel does is justified, that's not a coherent argument.
That's not what I said. I said that we were monstrous and we were racist and we committed atrocities. I said all those things.
Wait.
I also said it was a just war. And I also said it was a just war. I said those two things.
So your position is, as long as you feel like it's just, we can do anything we want.
That's not my position. That's not my position.
It's
disgusting what we're doing. And I really wish that we had.
Zach, wait, Zach, let me ask you a question. Let's say Israel decides the only way to defeat Hamas is we need to kill 90% of the civilian population. You can make the same argument. It's still a just war. There's no limit to the amount of people. Wait. There's no limit to the amount of people you could murder as long as you just hide behind, well, it's just. There's a difference between, again, and I started by saying this, Israel has a right to self-defense. That doesn't mean everything we do in the name of self-defense is justified. The same way Palestinians have a right to resist, not every form of resistance is justified. I think this is a pretty basic value that we should uphold and try to universalize. So again, I agree. Israel has a right to defend its borders. There's many ways to do that. There's near infinite ways we could have gone about defending ourselves and making sure another October 7th didn't happen. And we decided one of the single most barbaric, atrocious ways possible. So that's the argument.
Well, look, if you can't solve, Adar, if you cannot solve a conflict through nonviolence, the only option that you have is violence, right? We tried honestly.
No, we didn't.
To solve,
no, we didn't try. No, we didn't try.
We tried. I mean, we gave them a state. We gave them a state. We gave them Gaza, and the incredible thing is,
what is this? A Douglas Murray argument? No, nobody really. But the first time I ever heard them say we gave them a state was that Douglas Murray said that on Joe Rogan, and it's ridiculous. Let's actually
ridiculous. We withdrew. Wait, you tell me the settlements are the problem? We removed the settlements. We gave them the land. Immediately they said, "We're not from Gaza." Isn't it so weird that people who want peace say that they're not from the piece of land that you just gave them? They said, "We're not from Gaza. We're from over there," pointing to southern Israel. And we have the right to throw ourselves wave after wave at we have the right to kill your children and kill your women until you leave, right? That's the goal of Hamas. They wrote a charter in 1988. They wrote a charter in 1988 before the blockade, during the occupation, granted, but before the blockade, what their goals were. And their goals are to make the Jews leave. Their story is extremely consistent, Adar. Jews stole the land from them. And the only resolution is for Jews to leave. There is no peaceful resolution if you hold that Jews have no right to belong in the land. There is no peaceful resolution. And you are committed. The problem with you is you have unreasonable faith and a bias towards peace through nonviolence. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but you are not willing to look at all the facts. You're only willing to look at the facts that support your conclusion, which is genuinely hold, and you're a good-hearted person, and you're a nice guy, and you're a good intellectual, and you hold a lot of good views. But you have this biased idea that the conflict is solvable, and it has to be solved through peace. And when evidence comes to your desk that shows you the opposite, you simply ignore it, or you say, "I'm Douglas."
Wait, no, Zach. That again is a misrepresentation of my argument, because what I've actually repeated on stream on many occasions is that we very well may need some level of force to solve conflicts, not just this conflicts. Violence sometimes is the only answer or the best answer. I recognize that, but it often isn't. And humans have a tendency towards violence. We're very quick to believe that violence is okay, and we're very slow to realize that there's likely a better alternative. I'm fighting that intuition very strongly and trying to promote ideas that help others fight that intuition. And I want us to exhaust all other options before deciding to take away humans' inalienable right to life. So this isn't just a pacifist view that's not grounded in reality. I believe that humans deserve an inalienable right to life, and if you're going to take away that right to life, it's a very serious decision to make, and you need to prove that you have no better options. So,
Adar, we've been trying for 100 years.
No.
Look,
Wait,
if
Zach,
a solution.
Wait, Zach, let me finish.
Sorry, go ahead.
We have tried on a few occasions. We have not done such a great effort. And I'll give just we don't need to go through the whole history. But what we did was we came to this land claiming it for our own. And I get it. In our eyes, we're an indigenous people returning. We wanted a place where we could be safe, where we could determine our future. In the eyes of the native population, in the eyes of the Palestinians, we are indistinguishable from a settler colonial movement. They responded to us as all populations before them responded to colonizers with violence. We've imposed on them conditions that in almost all instances will lead to some violence. We then use that violence as a justification to impose more of those same conditions. We have been repeating this for the past 100 or so years. So we have made some attempts, but every single time there was some amount of violence on their side, a small hiccup, we use that as a justification to expand our territory, to increase our oppressive policies on them. And again, we continue till today. We impose on them conditions that will always lead to violence. So yes, we had a negotiation where we wanted to give them half a state and they didn't agree. The fact that the PA recognized Israel's right to exist in 1989 is such a massive win that I can't even begin to describe. The native population almost never agrees to give more than half their land to those who stole it. We don't even recognize how big of a win that is. Rejection should be expected. Acceptance requires tremendous work. We have not done tremendous work. We've done the bare minimum, and whenever the bare minimum doesn't work, we use that as a justification for more of the same violence and oppressive conditions. No, we haven't explored all options. We barely scratched the surface in truly trying to achieve peace on this land. Now, when it comes to Gaza, I agree. Hamas is a maximalist, fundamentalist terror organization. They're not an ideal partner for peace. Does that mean that there is no way to have peace with them? Of that, I remain unconvinced. But I also acknowledge if there's an area, there's a lot of things I say with a high degree of confidence. When I say it's possible to have peace with Hamas, I acknowledge that I may be overly optimistic. But to be convinced that I'm overly optimistic, I need to see that we've at least attempted. When they got elected in 2006, we instantly put them under siege. They reached out to us to negotiate a 10-year truce. We didn't sit down and counter their offer and try to meet in the middle. We outright rejected and put them under a brutal siege, not just a siege that stops weapons imports, but that stops imports of a lot of essentials. And we stopped 100% of exports. We destroyed their industries and destroyed their economy. So this wasn't a minimal siege just to make sure that they can't bring in weapons. No, this was oppressive in every way, shape, or form. There's no way we could describe this as giving them a state. So instead of trying to negotiate a 10-year truce and then taking those 10 years to build on that and maybe extend that to 20 years, and next thing you know, you have a full generation of relative quiet, who knows how different the landscape looks then. We didn't even try. Our policy with them has been no negotiation, no peace. We will continue to oppress you, and hopefully one day you'll just decide to love us. And until you decide to love us, we'll continue to oppress you, and this has been our policy, and it's not going to work. The status quo is immoral, it's unsustainable, and we need to find a way to change that.
Yeah, I don't think anything of what you said was true. They reached out for a truce for 10 years. They said they'd accept the two-state solution if all of the refugees returned. That's not the two-state solution. The two-state solution means that they give up the right of return. or at least they stop. I mean, they don't have to give it up in their hearts.
Again, you're talking about the terms of their truce.
Well, I think the terms are important. Could I get just another? I mean,
yeah. I just want to make one point. I agree the terms weren't favorable, but so what you do generally when someone comes with an offer, they come with extreme asks in order to meet in the middle. So you sit and you negotiate. You try to find common ground. We did none of that, but you can continue.
Well, they didn't want to find common ground. I mean, look, if you say we agree to the two-state solution and the right of return, it means you don't agree to the two-state solution. It's like if some settler wise guy were to get on your show and say, I believe in the two-state solution, Israel should be for the Jews and Jordan should be for the Palestinians. That's not the two-state solution. So they said two-state solution plus the return of the refugees to their ancestral homes, right? Because it's not just the general return of the refugees, it's the refugees to ancestral homes. Problem is that there are millions of Israelis living on those ancestral homes. And also, it was a 10-year truce, which was taken in bad faith. There is an Islamic principle, I think it's called Tawil. It was used by Muhammad against Taqiyya, thank you, where you're allowed to sign an agreement with non-Muslims in bad faith and then break it later at your strategic advantage. Now, does that mean that Islam is incompatible with peace? Obviously not. I mean, we have a peace agreement with Egypt, we have a peace agreement with Jordan, we have a peace agreement with Morocco. We'd love to have a peace agreement with Iran, we have a peace agreement with Bahrain, we have a peace agreement with Turkey, we have a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE. You know, we could have peace with Muslims, but there is this principle in Orthodox Islam that they take very seriously that says that, you know, you could sign a treaty in bad faith and then break it. Now, you said that we negotiated in bad faith. We never gave it to them.
No, we never negotiated. It's not bad faith.
We never negotiated. Well, we offered it to them.
I also want to correct you on something, and maybe a viewer can actually fact check this. I'm pretty sure Taqiyya is a Shia concept and not a Sunni concept, but somebody should look into that. But anyways, continue.
And look, let me just say with my criticisms of Islam, I'm very critical of Judaism as well. Okay. I don't think Judaism is about equal rights. I think that one of the reasons why Israelis are so racist is because of Judaism. So I don't want to come off as Islamophobic. I'm not a Hyrax or whoever that crackpot was, but history matters. It's a piece of evidence.
That was an interesting one, huh?
Yeah, that was fun.
Didn't Hyrax, huh?
So, yeah. Now, look, we have negotiated. We have offered them. Okay. The problem is that we're able to see their private communication, right? Israelis read Arabic. We know what they're saying to each other. And I just wanted,
just so you know,
all right. I mean, also, look, it's 10 years. It was the same thing that Mohammed signed with the Jews in Khaybar. Even if it was taken in good faith, it's the two-state solution plus the right of return, which is not the two-state solution. It's like saying the two-state solution, let all the Palestinians move to Jordan. I mean, you're just being a wise guy at that point. But this is
Zach, you could counter. We could counter. We could say, look, we agree to these terms, but in terms of two-state solution, it needs to be a reasonable number. We could allow for X amount into the West Bank, and we could allow for Y amount yearly into Israel proper and see how it works. You don't need to let hundreds of thousands in every year. You come to people have demands and negotiations. They often come with extreme demands in order to meet in the middle. To not even sit and try to reach a truce is a missed opportunity. And I'm saying it might not have worked, but to not try is to ensure violence.
So this is a wonderful book by a real Israeli scholar, a man of the left like myself, and it's called "In Search of Modern Palestinian Nationhood." And he writes about the different schools within the PLO in the 1970s and the 1980s. And there were two schools. There was the extreme school, which said, we don't recognize Israel. We don't negotiate with Israel because our goal is all of Palestine. And the only way to achieve that is through armed struggle. Then he has a chapter on the moderate school or the pragmatic school. Okay, these were the peaceniks. And I want to read a portion of this book. So this guy's name is Khalid Al-Hassan. The ultimate goal. Al-Hassan does not mince words when dealing with the ultimate goal of Palestinian national struggle. As I have been quoted repeatedly, the presentation of a Palestinian state in part of Palestine as the sole ultimate objective, so meaning a Palestinian state in the West Bank and a Palestinian state in Gaza, would constitute an act of betrayal. If Palestinians give up 48 Palestine, or what's currently Israel, they'd be betraying their past. It is not only a social sin, but a religious sin. Okay? Although admittedly one stage in the process toward the establishment of the democratic Palestinian state, a Palestinian state in part of Palestine is only a means to an end in the program of the step-by-step strategy. So this is what's called the two-stage solution. Okay? This is the moderate view. First, we sign an agreement with the Israelis. We get our state in the West Bank. And then from there, we attack Israel again. Part of the issue here, too, which doesn't get enough coverage, is the geography. The West Bank literally sits on top of the coastal plain, where Tel Aviv is and the surrounding environs. It would be very easy to attack Tel Aviv and its suburbs by rockets, by Katyushas. It's already happened. Something like 70% of Israel's population lives there in a very small area. An area smaller than Nassau County, Long Island, in case you know. About 70% of the population lives there and 80% of the industrial base. So Israel has read the internal communication of Palestinians. Palestinians don't want it. They want all the land because we stole it from them. And if you look at Palestinian intellectuals, Diana Buttu, Ali Abu Nima, Mohammed Shahada, Mohammed El-Kurd, if you run down the list, they all seem to say the same things. Now, there are a couple of wonderful Palestinian intellectuals that you brought on, and I'm going to say something offensive. I haven't heard of you guys, but you had a guy on yesterday who gave this whole history about Zionism. I didn't agree with what he said, but it was like, besides John Aziz, it was the first time I ever heard a Palestinian speak fairly about Zionism and about the Jewish people. And do I believe there are voices on that side? Yes, but there aren't enough voices. Okay, those people hold no power. Those people are not representative. They're not statistically significant. Okay, we look at Palestinian ideas, that the whole land belongs to them, and Palestinian history, and it is impossible to believe that oppression is the major driver of Palestinian violence. I mean, so let's say the occupation is the problem. Say the occupation is a problem. How do you expect people to react when you occupy them? Okay, so let's run that experiment. What we should see in history is a bright blue line between the time after the occupation and the time before the occupation. After the occupation, we expect to see violence. Before the occupation, we expect to see no violence. But we see violence in the 1950s. No,
I think
you're violence in the 1940s.
Wait.
Can I keep going?
You're just oversimplifying the grievance. It's not that the only thing is occupation. No, it's land theft, it's disposition, it's ethnic cleansing. There's been 100 years of an ethnic conflict that they have continuously been the losing and weaker side. And when they respond, again, to the conditions we impose on them, when I say conditions we impose on them, that's not only occupation. It's the entire Zionist movement.
When does that start? Give me a year. Give me a year. 19, you want to say the Nakba? So let's do the same exercise.
No.
Before the Nakba, we should see no violence. After the Nakba, we should see no violence. Yet there's violence in the 1930s.
Wait. Zack, you asked me when I want to start, and then you said the Nakba. That's not when the conflict started. I would say
give me a year. Come on, hit me. 1917.
I would say you could say it's in the 1880s when Zionism started, but I'd say more so in the early 1900s, 1910s when we started displacing Palestinians. We started kicking them out of their homes, and we started moving to the land to Ottoman Palestine and then British Mandate Palestine en masse, with a patronizing attitude towards them and with clear ambition to build a Jewish homeland on Palestinian land. No native population is going to accept this. Obviously.
That's fine. That's fine. But come on, wait. No. Let me play the game. 1880.
Oh, so now you want to point to the fact that there's been violence in history. No shit.
Muslim, yes, I do actually. I actually do.
No. Okay, so okay, great. Let's look at it. No. I mean,
if I had a museum, if I was teaching a course on Israel Palestine, right? It's like you teach a course or you have a museum, right? Where do you place Palestinian violence on the general timeline of things, right? Like where does that museum start? All right, you're going to start with a preview of Palestinian violence,
So,
the suicide.
wait.
Wait a second, I'm getting there. But the background is not Zionism, but our lives under Islam. I mean, we've lived for Islam for 1,300 years before Zionism, and not for one single day did we live in equality. Now, granted, they tolerated us more than the Europeans. So they always say this, oh, we tolerated you more than the medieval Europeans. Yes, I agree. But by a medieval standard, Muslims and Arabs treated us pretty well. But we were not equal. We lived in under apartheid conditions, which was at best tolerance, often confiscation, dispossession, ethnic cleansing, and violence that we lived under. So if you're going to place Palestinian violence on a timeline, if I'm going to place it on a timeline, I also put it on the timeline of Islamic and Arab violence against Jews, because Muslims have never shared their society with Jews. We've never been equal with them, not a single time. And that is at the core of this conflict, because you can go back before the occupation, before the blockade, before the occupation, before the Nakba, and even before Zionism. You cannot find a time where there was equal treatment of Jews and no violence against Jews.
I'm not sure what point this is trying to prove. What you're responding to me is saying we impose on them conditions that lead to violence, and then use that violence as a justification for more of those same conditions. You pointing to the fact that historically minority groups are oppressed, that is fact. That is true about Jews, whether in the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, but it's also true about virtually all other minority groups. Yeah, Jews had it probably a little bit harder than other minority groups, but that's consistent throughout history. When we look at the frequency of violence, and this is how we can know cause and effect, the frequency of violence increased significantly with Zionism. You could put it on a graph, and you said you want like a museum. So put this graph in a museum. How many instances of violence there were per 100 years until the 20th century, and then how many instances of violence there were in the 20th century, and you're going to recognize very clearly that Zionism contributed significantly to violence. And this shouldn't be surprising, because when people come en masse and claim land for their own that other people are living on, violence will ensue.
Absolutely. That's all. But at a certain point,
but also let me agree with you on something. The fact that we have never been equal as minorities should give us concern about being a minority on the land. I understand that concern. It's a very real concern. And it's why we should try to find a solution where there's an institution or institutions that rule the land that ensure that our rights cannot be infringed upon, because we do have legitimate reason for concern, especially after 100 years of conflict. There's no reason to think that we could just have one state for all people, like many of the Western leftists think, just one state for all people, kumbaya, it'll all work out. I want to be wrong about that and say it would work out. I don't think it would. So there I agree with you. So yes, we need to take that into consideration and have that reflect the institutions on the land to make sure we could protect our rights. But this does not at all speak to our policies for the past 100 years and our minimal effort to actually resolve it peacefully.
So this guy, Sean, said, yes, it increased with Zionism because that's when Jews started wanting power. Okay, so in the 1930s, there's a group of Jewish intellectuals called Brit Shalom, and they expressed many of the same reservations that Adar has expressed about Zionism. They anticipated a lot of the violence and the monstrosities that Zionism has committed since the creation of a Jewish state. And what they tried to do was to find Arab partners to build an equal state, a shared state. They went and they tried to find Arabs who would sit down with them and talk about having a shared country. They really couldn't find any. They couldn't find any of note. They found two guys who were minor players.
Why do we need
Let me just finish the point. Let me just finish the point, please. They found two Arabs, two Palestinians, not major powers, minor figures, who met with them. Those two Palestinians were assassinated shortly after, because If you say that somebody stole your house, it makes no sense to share the land with them in 2 states, and it makes no sense to share the land with them in 1 state. Let's say you come to your house, and common analogy Palestinians use. Let's say you come home from vacation and somebody's living in your house, okay? And you say, "Hey man, what the hell are you doing in your house, in my house?" And they say, "I'm sorry, I realize, you must be so upset. Let's do the following. Me and my family will live on the 2nd floor, and you live on the 1st floor." And what do you say to the squatter? You say, "Get the fuck out of my house." And let's say the squatter says, "Okay, I understand why you're upset. Let's try this instead. Instead of us living on the 2nd floor and you living on the 1st floor, let's share the house. So we can use the kitchen together, and we can use the bathrooms together, and we can use the pool together and the garage together." And you know what you say to that guy? You say, "Get the fuck out of my house," because it's your house. And they have no right to share it. They have no right to split it and to take the 2nd floor. They have no right to share it with you equally. And in that way, 2 states and 1 states, which are often held to be opposites, are really the different sides of the same coin, because they both involve Jews sharing the land with Palestinians. And it does not make any sense. It's incoherent in the light of Palestinian claims that all the land is theirs, that Jews are illegal aliens, that they don't belong there. And Adar, you said that, well, we settled there. Okay, and I understand that they're upset. But at a certain point, you have to accept this as belonging. And here's my rule, okay? You belong in a place if you were born to people who were born to people there. If your parents are native born and you're native born, then you belong in that place, okay? That's the justification for Zionism. We live here now, okay? Did we do things wrong in the past? I don't think so, but let's not go to the past. Let's talk about the present. We live here now. The vast majority of us do not have any other passports. It is wrong to kick us out. And I know that Adar agrees with me. It's wrong to kick us out. And that's what the Palestinians want to do. They want to kick us out because the land is theirs and it doesn't belong to us. And we have no right to it in any arrangement. And if they believe what they say, and if we believe what they say, then we cannot come to any form of nonviolent agreement. Okay? Because saying that the whole land is theirs rules it out. We're not going to leave. We're going to stay. We live here. And they're going to stay too. Even though I think Palestinians are a fake people and they were invented yesterday. Sometimes I like putting my microwave on 5 seconds and watching it run so I can appreciate the depth and the breadth of Palestinian history. That was a joke. They exist. But the basis for their existence is not that they're an ancient people. They're not. They were invented 5 minutes ago. The basis is that they live here now. And we also live here now. And we're not just going to leave. So if you've exhausted all of your nonviolent options, then the only thing left is violence. And so the question with Gaza, coming back to that, is how much violence can Israel use? How much violence is Israel able to use? And you're allowed to say Israel went too far. But that's the only choice we have.
Cool. So the house analogy, it's interesting you bring it up because it's also something I hear some of the hardliner Palestinians bring up as a reason for why we can't compromise. It's not a good analogy because a house is a very small space, and living with somebody you hate in a confined space comes with a great emotional toll. That's not the same thing as sharing a piece of land. So the analogy breaks down very quickly. In terms of Palestinians not accepting us, you brought an example. What year was that example from? Where they said they couldn't.
1936.
Okay, yeah. So
let's cites it in 1 state, 2 states.
Yeah. So let's fast forward nearly a century, right?
Yeah.
The PA, who used to be more radical than Hamas, recognized Israel's right to exist in 1989 and has been willing to cooperate and negotiate with us. In fact, one of the reasons that there hasn't been a third intifada is very likely security cooperation between the PA and Israel. Now, instead of Israel rewarding the PA and strengthening Abbas for this cooperation, what we do is just continue to expand settlements and continue a system of oppression on the Palestinians in the West Bank. What we did in Gaza was the opposite. When Hamas was violent towards us, we withdrew. So what we did was we created the situation where we said, oh, when you cooperate with Israel, we'll take more land. And when you're violent towards us, you'll retreat. So we made a huge mistake on one hand, rewarding violence and showing there's a consequence to cooperation. We've had decades where we could have been working with Abbas to give them a Palestinian state, but instead we've continued to expand slowly. And with this expansion comes more checkpoints And with more checkpoints comes more humiliation. We often say these are people that only understand force. It's not true. More than anything, they speak the language of honor, and we dishonor them daily. History is full of extremists becoming moderate when certain conditions are met. The first leaders of this country were part of Jewish militias, many of which engaged in terrorism. The IRA was a terrorist organization that became part of a legitimate government. You had the same thing in South Africa. You even have a video of Nelson Mandela singing "Kill the Boers," and then he became a great peacemaker. Currently, the leader of Syria is Al-Qaeda, and he's willing to normalize with us. So this idea that the Palestinian rejection is somehow set in stone and not subject to change given a change in environmental conditions is just, in my opinion, a fundamentally flawed way of looking at it. We saw that during Oslo, you had over 50% of Palestinians support two states. They had hope. They believed that it was possible. By inspiring hope and by showing that through cooperation, peace is possible, sovereignty is possible, or equality is possible, whichever direction we want to take it in, you can inspire a movement of Israelis and Palestinians that will agree that violence is not the way. But when we reward violence and oppress those cooperating with us, we reinforce more of the same, and when we maintain a status quo that humiliates and dishonors Palestinians daily, they're never just going to decide to love us. So yeah, here and there we try for peace, but we've done very little relative to the big picture. And when we look at history, we see that obviously people change. It's the only constant change. This is reflected in public opinion polling. This is reflected throughout history. So I don't accept this idea saying they'll never accept us.
I didn't say they'll never accept us, but you have to evaluate things based on information. I just want to briefly touch on.
I'm evaluating. I recognize it's not easy, but we're barely trying.
We've tried it, Adar, and they've said no to us over and over again. And you'd have to see, before I just respond to you, Mr. Jasser, let me just say to him, I say that Palestinians are fake. I say that tongue in cheek. Palestinians are real. I believe that Palestinians, as a nationality doesn't come around until 1948. I'm basically saying that to right wingers, which don't really seem to be represented either on the panel or in the chat, because right wingers will say, well, Palestinians are fake, therefore they don't deserve rights. So what I try to do as somebody who considers myself a thinker is I always ask, can I accept what you said and still make my point, right? Because I think often we reach to reject a point, but I think it's even stronger to say, can I accept what you said and still beat you? So can I say that Palestinians are fake, but Palestinians still have rights? Yes, because you live here, you were born here to people who were born here, just like we were.
So you would agree, Zach, saying it's fake is just unnecessarily inflammatory. Like, what's there to gain if you like people who say they're made up generally say that in order to justify oppressing them. So, but
right, I'm saying even if we agree that we were made up,
there's no reason to bring it up because it's just unnecessarily inflammatory, right?
Well, in case somebody right wing is listening and is saying, because the Israelis you bring on are not usually representative, and that's not your fault. It's just a tendency of this sort of content. But there are a lot of right wing Israelis who say that Palestinians don't exist, and this would be my response to them. Even if they don't exist, even if you're right, you're still wrong. That's the stronger argument. Even if you're right, you're still wrong. Anyway, in terms of peace, Adar, yes, of course they can change. I believe that they can change. There's no question that they can change. But we have to look at the facts on the ground. Like, what are Palestinians saying, right? How come I never heard of a John Aziz or that fellow, I think his name was Gil or something, that you had yesterday? If you go and you look at Palestinian intellectuals, they are of one mind. They say the land is ours. The Jews don't deserve to be here. They march through the streets. Settlers, go home. Palestine is not your home. And what you're saying, Adar, the problem with you is I think you're like a ventriloquist. You say what you want to hear. You want to believe that Palestinians want peace because it means that the solution will be solved and it'll be solved non-violently. I just try to approach things openly. Whatever I see, I say. So when Palestinians are chanting things like, settlers, go home, or we don't want two states, we want all of it, I think they mean it. And far too often we analyze what Palestinians say. We don't need to analyze what they say. We just need to observe. They're genuine when they say that they believe the land belongs to us, that we are a settler colonial people and we have no rights to it. That's what they're saying now. In the future, can that change? Absolutely. But now not only do they say that we committed genocide against them, which I know with all my arguments, I'll never be able to unconvince them for. So if we're talking about the future and hope, I don't really see that much hope. I always try to end the debates. You try to give a hopeful note. I try to give a hopeless note. One of my great heroes, Franz Kafka, says, "There's hope for God, but none for us." There's no hope for us in the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Things are only going to get worse. And I want things to get better, but I have to go by what I see. And I see increasing hatred. And the worst part of it is you now have two sides. You have Hamas with the Palestinians and the Israelis who both think they won the war, who both believe that they won the war, and both see signs that they're going to be able to accomplish what they want to accomplish going forward in the next decade. For the Palestinians, that's a Palestine without Jews. And now increasingly for a majority of Israelis, that is a Palestine in Israel without Palestinians.
Thank you. We're going to need to leave it with that because I have a call. So that's the closing arguments.
Sure.
If you want, do you want to join the Discord? Because we do have a crew here on Discord. I'm sure they'd like to speak to you and continue the conversation. Do you have time, Zach?
Sure. I have like 25 minutes. I mean, if people
Okay, so yeah, hop on Discord. So crew, those watching this, I just dropped a link in the chat. You could find another link in the description, or if you're watching this on Twitter, you could find that in my bio. If you want to join the after party, Zach will be there, and we got a nice crew. Also, who here can mod Omar? Okay, there's some hosts here. Altoids, you guys will hold it down. And Zach, thank you for coming on.
Thank you a lot, Adar. I appreciate the airtime. Appreciate you having me on for all these years, and I really enjoy the program. Let me just say quickly, I was tuning in to be polite because you invite me on, and then I started tuning in because I really enjoy the content and the conversation. So thank you for what you do.
My pleasure. I appreciate that, Zach. Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back with another stream sometime this weekend. Hope to see you on Discord.